Welcome to the Manifestation Lab. This is your host, Kelly Howe. From the grounded science to the mystical and unseen, we're investigating this big experiment we call life and finding what really works when it comes to manifesting a life that sets your heart and your soul on fire. Welcome to the lab. Welcome back to the Manifestation Lab. I'm so excited to have Rhonda Leifheit with me again. She's a returning champion. People loved your episode, Rhonda, with the Akashic Records. And so I'm really excited to welcome you back. And today we're going to be focusing on the Chinese I Ching or I Ching. I'm not sure how you say that exactly, but I really wanted to connect with you specifically because I saw a newsletter go out. It's one of the things I love about my podcast guests. I usually get on their newsletters and then I see what they're up to. And you have recently been teaching classes about the I Ching.
Yes.
And I do human design readings, and we've had human design experts on. Are you familiar with human design?
Actually, I'm not.
And that's okay. Yeah, no, but the reason I wanted to talk to you is that it is a more recent system, but they bake into it several ancient systems, one of those being the I Ching. And to be totally honest, I don't know a ton about it. So because I'm obsessed with human design and love that system, I really want to learn more. And I'm sure my listeners will want to learn more about what the I Ching is. So welcome back. And let's just go ahead and start there. Like, what is the Chinese I Ching and how can we use it? How can it help our life?
All right. Thanks, Kelly. It's just wonderful to be with you again and to be able to share principles of the I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese tool of divination. It's the translation for I Ching. Some people say I Ching, but the translation for it is Book of Changes. And it is a collection of 64 different pieces of wisdom, having a philosophy and purpose from which it's evolved, which we won't jump right into, but 64 different descriptions of kind of the human condition. And as a divination tool, or some would call it an oracle, others think of it as consulting the sage, accessing higher wisdom, which is probably my favorite way of thinking of it. That the I Ching is a tool for striving towards the highest in our actions, our intentions, by following the wisdom of the sage, also known as following the Tao, Tao. Principle of Taoist philosophy, quite simply, is the way or the flow. Now, it gets more complicated than, just the easy way out type of thing, because sometimes to do the right thing may not always feel like the easiest thing. But the I Ching is designed, and there are many translations. I have several that I use that I like. And each of them, or the different translations, each offer an interpretation for what this ancient oracle has been saying, guiding people for thousands of years.
Okay, beautiful.
And I'd like to say right off the bat, I am not a scholar when it comes to the I Ching. And there are many scholarly works and there's beautiful complexities within it, but I have been using it for 50 years and it is my go-to. It was the first thing I came across as a guide, as a tool, and it has proven to be very reliable. And that's what we want when we think of whether it's a sage, a guide, a therapist, or a friend. We want reliability, we want wisdom, we want somebody who's going to keep us on track with the highest integrity. Yeah.
Okay, I love that you say that. I was actually just thinking yesterday about how that's one of the reasons that I love using my tarot cards, because I feel like they're kind of the truth tellers and they show me underlying energies and themes that maybe my conscious mind hasn't really wanted to pay attention to. And I just love that you said that because I was just sort of pondering that yesterday, that it's like having this friend that will tell you exactly what you need to hear, even if you don't want to hear it.
Yes.
So I want to back up just a little bit. You mentioned that it's a divination tool. So just on the really basic level, could you describe what a divination tool is?
You might think of it as a way of connecting with the divine, with higher order. And it can, sometimes people think of divination as predicting the future. And in some ways, it can be useful for that. And we can talk kind of specifically some ways it might do that. But as a tool for connecting with the divine, it taps us into that principle of synchronicity, which tarot and other tools do as well, where we're kind of leaving behind the cause and effect analysis, the hashing that we go through and the pros and cons of a decision, and really turns it over and releases it to this principle of synchronicity, which in using the I Ching, typically, or maybe most easily, I should say, is consulted by using 3 coins, often 3 pennies, that are tossed 6 times. And with each throw of the coins, you get either a yin line, a feminine line, also called a broken line or 2 dashes, or a solid line, a male line, yang, summer, those kinds of principles that are behind it. And so it's really based on the dynamics between the yin feminine principle and the yang masculine principle and all the subtleties in between. Okay, it's never just black and white. And again, it's one of the things I love about it, because it's not to be used for just yes or no questions, right? If you want to do that, you can flip a quarter and get a yes or no answer. But as you know, again, with something like the tarot, the I Ching will go deeper, help us see maybe the things that we've been ignoring. And in my experience, says it in a very diplomatic way, which a friend or therapist might not be able to say so diplomatically. So very often for me, pondering a question or what's the best response to a situation, I'll read the answer and it's like, oh, yes, of course. It's like it's
Yes.
obvious when I settle in and ask for that wisdom. But until then, I might be, in turmoil. So
Okay, so if we're going to use the coins, when you talk about it being yin or yang,
mhm.
are you looking at, so say, do you decide like heads is yin, tails are yang? Or how do you decide if you have 3 coins? How do you know if it's a line, a solid line or a broken line?
Yeah, there are instructions in each of the books, and some show it a little differently than others. So it might be a little bit more complex to try and describe. Uh, the way I learned it, tails have a value of 3 rather, heads have a value of 2, and then you add them up, and they produce either a solid yang line or a yielding broken yin line. And
Okay.
then you layer them one on top of the other for those 6 throws. That gives you 6 lines. And then you look up in the book to see which of the 64 readings.
Okay.
Because there are 6 lines, those are called hexagrams. So that's where that term comes from. I really just discovered that the technical word is the Chinese word is gua, Kwa, but I didn't know that. I've always known it as hexagrams, but the Chinese term
Okay.
is gua.
Okay. So each of these numbers, there's 6 different lines, and 3 of them are yin and 3 of them are yang. Am I understanding this right?
No, they can be
Oh, okay.
any combination, and that's how you get the 64. It can be
Okay.
any combination of 3 solid lines and then 3 yin or broken lines or alternating and that sort of thing. And so there's a chart in the back by which, after throwing the coins, that's the part when I teach a class that kind of requires a little hands-on, a little explanation there. Some books are better at kind of guiding people as to how to throw the coins and get the answers than others. But yeah.
I came across some websites too that had some like you just click and it will roll or it will throw the coins for you and kind of show you what it is and give you the message. So I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, I kind of think that electronically spirit can communicate with us very easily. So I'm kind of like, well, sure, why not? But there is something about having the physical thing and doing the physical thing with the physical cards or the coins or whatever. So I don't
And,
know how you feel
and
about that.
and I have known people to go online, get some useful answers, but of course, because of the way I learned it, and I do love, holding those coins, sitting with it, that sort of thing. Now, I should say the original way of divining or utilizing, accessing the I Ching was through 50 stalks of yarrow. And these yarrow flowers are on a long, thin stem. It's a more complicated way to go at it. It's more time consuming. I learned it once, but I really don't remember how. So I do go back to the coins. But if you want to get very authentic, and to prove my point, many years ago, I had somebody call me and he was wanting to learn about the I Ching. And somebody told him to call somebody in the Chinese language department at the nearby university. And so he called the Chinese language department, talked to a man who's obviously Chinese, asked him about, well, I'm interested in doing this. And he said, well, the first thing you do is grow the yarrow. Now,
Oh,
it takes a few years for the yarrow stalks to come up. And I just thought it was a beautiful illustration of the respect for that process and the timing. Um, and so I think that was a wonderful
the
illustration.
patience
The patience, yes,
that
yes,
I'm
yes,
struggle
yes.
with sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I told him about the pennies, but
Yes. So
yeah.
you found this system right out of the gate. What did that look like for you when how did that drop into your life?
At the time, I'd moved from where I grew up in Northern Illinois out to Palo Alto, California. This was the early 70s. And I do not know who it was. I don't recall who introduced me to it. And um, I didn't keep a record of my readings. I started doing that in 1983. So I have journal after journal after journal of the readings I've done since 1983, but not
Wow.
since the early 70s. That first translation, I believe, was the only English translation available at the time. It was called the Wilhelm Baines edition. And it was kind of underwritten by Carl Jung, or he had connections and he had utilized the I Ching and found it um, very helpful and very wise. In fact, of course, he coined the term synchronicity as we understand it. And just yesterday, synchronistically, I got an email from someplace with this quote from Carl Jung.
Ooh.
Synchronicity is an ever present reality for those who have eyes to see it.
Mm.
So, yes, so that's how I got started. I utilized it then. Um, And then somebody, when I moved to St. Louis, when I got here, somebody introduced me to a new translation. And it was kind of like, well, this is a new friend. I don't know them very well, but I do find that one of the references I go to a lot, that translation. So, yeah.
What kinds of things initially did you utilize it for and have kind of that aha moment of like, oh, wow, there's really something to this?
Yes, yes, very good question. The range of usefulness is really broad. And I've used it for very mundane questions about is it a good time to take this trip to travel somewhere? Is it a good time to start this new class, a different topic? Um, if I'm really baffled, maybe it's like, well, is this the best time of day to teach it? Now, a lot of times we're going to make decisions without that, right? But there are those times where you just feel like something's you need some outside help. So those are some mundane ways of using it. And I've got one or two examples that I can give, but also very helpful in personal understanding of the best way to proceed, maybe in a difficult relationship or a big choice that we have to make in our lives. Um, uh, One client who came to me had been professor at a university, and she'd been there a number of years and was thinking of leaving. And so we did two different readings. One was, what's the advisability of leaving this position? And then we asked also, what's the advisability of staying? And sometimes you need to do that. I don't remember what the answers were. I know she ended up leaving, but sometimes you can ask it from both angles. So the deeper questions, I think, are really important. Where you find the greatest wisdom, where the I Ching really shines in terms of correcting our attitudes, because the wisdom of the I Ching, again, brings us back to what in the earliest translation was called, they called it the superior man and the inferior man. What it's really referring to is our superior nature, our higher self, our highest integrity, or are we functioning from the lower self, the ego, the childish wanting, or the fearful distancing or barricading or whatever? And so the I Ching does really shine, I find, when I'm like asking questions like, how do I best respond to this person, this dilemma, this situation that has me just baffled? Now, I'll give you an example of just kind of a mundane use. And think of the I Ching like this. I like to think of it really like a weather report. It's not really telling you yes or no, do this, don't do this. It gives you the conditions. So let's say I want to take a trip from St. Louis back up to Northern Illinois. It's wintertime. And I get a weather report that says, snow is in the forecast, maybe 1 to 5 inches or something like that. Now, I get to decide, do I just want to stay home or do I want to tackle it? Do I want to do it? If I want to do it, I know the conditions. So the I Ching is also kind of the way of saying, okay, fill up the gas tank, take some extra food, maybe some sand, a shovel, or whatever you might need. And so that's really what the I Ching is doing. It's not saying go, don't go, do this, don't do that, but giving you the subtles and the way to best handle it. So if you're thinking about making a change, maybe somebody's looking at a different job or something like that, and you might get a reading that says difficulty at the beginning. So what you know is, presuming you make that move, you're like, okay, I know it's going to be rough at the start, but it's telling me how to handle that. Maybe don't push too hard. Don't be too anxious. Take your time, and then things will begin to unfold. So the wisdom of just knowing how to best act in those situations. Now,
I love
early,
this.
okay.
I love every bit of this.
So early on, um, this was in the early 90s, and I was in a relationship, and my brother was working for TWA when it still existed. So my partner and I got buddy passes to go to England, to go to London. And so we're all excited about that trip. And then my brother calls like a week before we're supposed to leave. And he said, Rhonda, I'm kind of worried because when you're coming back is when those buddy passes end. A lot of people may be coming back, could get backlogged. You could end up paying $1,000 to get back. And that was back in the early 90s, and the buddy pass was pretty cheap. So my friend and I are like, well, what do we do? So he and I did an I Ching reading where we alternated throwing the coins. Now I don't know even know if this is recommended, but we asked, what's the advisability of going on the dates we've chosen? And the answer was number 41, called decline. And so as we read it, it really, really didn't look good. But I wasn't ready to let go of that trip quite yet. So it's kind of like, well, what if we change the dates a little bit? What if we
Yeah.
come back a little
Yeah.
earlier? And what I got then was 33 retreat, which means just pull back. And then it changed to stagnation.
Mm.
And that idea of just sitting, nothing happening. And it's like, so he and I, and he had been using the I Ching for a while too, enough to trust it. We're like, you know what, let's not do it. We scrapped that trip completely. We asked about going to the Redwoods. I don't remember what came up, but it looked much better out to, I should say, San Francisco, and took a drive up into the Redwoods. And it was a wonderful trip. So we get back a week or so later, and my brother says, good thing you didn't go. People were stuck at Heathrow
Oh,
Airport and or
oh my
paying big
goodness.
bucks. So that's one example. Yeah.
It's a beautiful example. It is. And I was going to ask, can you kind of feel out different timelines and different plans? And it sounds like that's exactly what you did. Like, okay, well, but what if we just do this? And
Yes.
and they still were saying no, like this
Yes.
really isn't. And I know that they weren't saying no, but it was giving you accurate interpretations of what the energy would be like.
Right. Right.
You'd be
Perfect.
sitting in the
Yes.
airport for 12
You
hours
can
or
go, but yes, you're going to sit there for a while. Now, one other travel story that I have that was so significant. Also, this is going back a while. Um, one of my nieces, um, living in on the West Coast, 17 years old at the time, was having this sudden health crisis. And my sister was the only other family member out there. So I really, really wanted to go. I was still able, my brother's still working for the airline. So I'm getting a buddy pass short term on short notice to get out there. Well, the day before I leave, there was an earthquake in Seattle. And my connecting flight was through Portland. And so I called the airline the night before and they said, things are really backed up. It is not looking good if you're flying standby. They're really not looking good. And she said, you can go if you want, but we really can't promise anything. So I got out the I Ching and threw the coins. And what I got was hexagram number 31, which is called attraction. And I'm going to read just some of the lines because the I Ching says it so much better. Keep an open mind. Such readiness has a creative effect. Maintain innocence of mind and independence of spirit. This attitude, combined with a willingness to wait through the changes, is in harmony with the creative. It automatically draws the affection and loyalty of others. So I went with my most positive attitude that I could, knowing I might not get on, but the best thing I could do was use that kind of attractive energy. Not only did I get on, but they put me in first class, which they weren't supposed to
what?
do with a buddy
Amazing.
pass. Yeah. And so I was able to get out there to see my niece and my sister, and things turned out good. But yeah, so that illustrates just how practical it can be. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love it so much. So I do this a lot with decision making with, like I said, with my tarot. And I just find, like I said, I just find that it's so accurately will show me what the energy of a situation will be in the near future. And I don't know about you, but for me, if it's like I don't like the energy of that specific thing, maybe it's something I have to do,
Yeah.
then I can come back to myself and go, okay, what can I do inside to shift this timeline?
There you go. Yes.
What can I do with my energy and then surrender to, and maybe it will do nothing and I'm still going to end up sitting in that stagnation or whatever it is. But it is just such a like gentle tap on the shoulder to be like, hey, this is what could happen. This is the timeline you're on. Either pick a different path or shift your energy
Yes,
and see what
yes.
can change.
And that's where the I Ching is like suggesting how to shift the energy. So very often when I'm consulting the I Ching, formulating the question is a big part of it, right? And in an instance like maybe for that flight, I might say, what's the advisability of going ahead? But another good question is, what is the best attitude or approach to take with this
Mm,
person, with this situation? So that, yes, there is that inward capacity to adjust and adapt, knowing there are just things we can't control except inwardly.
yes.
So I want to be sure and say that the I Ching is a lot about timing because it's based not only on the yin yang of the yin principle shows up as winter, the yang principle shows up as summer.
Mhm.
And then when you combine yin and yang, then you get spring and fall. And then you can break it out further. So the spring and fall constitute, if you put two lines together, and then you can put three lines together, you get images, what the Chinese call images of the mountain or thunder, or these various images, and they all convey something. But the underlying sense of it is like, is this the right season? And if it is the right season, so not only is it timing, it's like, what's the best approach then? Okay, it's planting season, or it's time to approach this person
Mm.
to do that. The I Ching is also beautiful in its balance of the yin and yang. And I think in the Western world, we don't nearly appreciate yin principle, the feminine principles of inwardness, of waiting, of being patient, of allowing things to unfold. So very often the I Ching is going to be, or just as equally, I should say, going to be telling somebody, hold on, or go
Mhm.
inward and just wait.
Yes. I completely agree. And I think so much of that has to do with being trained out of listening to our intuition so early and
Mm,
doubting that inwardness, going inwards for those inner messages, but also honoring that space and that time when the gas isn't on and it shouldn't be, because we
yes,
are in a time where we're resting, we're preparing, we're rejuvenating and getting ready for that big yang period. But our culture is so like, go, 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 make it happen. Just do
yes.
it,
Do something even if it's wrong.
to do something
Sometimes.
even if it's wrong. Don't
Yeah,
sit, don't wait, make
yeah.
it happen, make it happen. And it all ties into that, very feminine, listening to our intuition and honoring those cycles of the winter and summer. And I know
Mhm.
that I'm just as guilty of that as anyone, but I do find, I was just writing down and recognizing how much I just love divination systems.
Mhm.
And I'm fascinated by them. And I just truly feel like they've been life-changing for me in that sense of someone, or this system that can come in and say, hey, like, you don't need to push right now. It's
Yeah.
not actually in your best interest. And I'm really looking forward to diving in and maybe playing with this a little bit, because at this point, I think I've worked through the doubt and the resistance. And I did a lot of that with working with my tarot cards through the years, and just pulling a card daily and seeing how that showed up. And at this point, I'm just like all in. I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
these things, this is real. It is showing us the energy of the situation, whether we like it or not. But I'm excited to have probably an even older, I would imagine a much, much older, thousands of years old
It is
system
considered,
to tap into.
yeah, considered to go back. I've read anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 years,
Wow.
but started with other types of oracles and then evolved through time. Yeah. Uh,
Is there anything in the I Ching where there's like a lifetime reading,
oh,
or
yes, there is.
is there?
Yes. And this was, I mentioned in my first introduction to the I Ching, the Wilhelm Baines edition, which I still have. One of the only things written in the back of it was a what I call the big picture questions that somebody suggested I do this. I don't know, other than this friend of mine, I don't know where this idea came from, but I did these questions, and I suggest to people, don't ask these questions until you're really ready and trust the I Ching, where you think of it as a reliable guide, where you feel like you can hear the answers it's going to say. So these questions have been guiding me since 1981, and I continue to revisit them. But this is when I first learned about this. These big questions you ask about: what is my destiny? What is my gift? What is my obstacle? And what is my calling? And for me, my destiny came up as number 20. Now, the image of number 20, when you put the lines together, you've got 4 little broken lines and then 2 solid lines at the top, which is the image of a tower. And so the idea of being at the top of a tower is that it gives you a broader view of things. And that's really been a guiding principle for me in terms of that sense of destiny. A couple days ago, when I was preparing for this, I, of course, asked the I Ching if it had any advice for me. It came up number 20, contemplating.
Oh, I
So
love it.
this is the type of thing that happens where you kind of get reinforcements and messages. Just to move through the others for me, the gift, the message for the gift that I got back then was number 55, abundance or fullness. The obstacle, number 53, is called gradual progress, which I attribute to being like a triple Taurus. You know, it takes a while, the tortoise and the hare type.
I think we talked about that in the last
Yes.
podcast episode, how both of us feel like we've just, it's like slow, gradual progress, right?
Yes. And to kind of see, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, you know, that's helpful. And then for the calling, which is that sense of, you know, what inspires you and supports you and that sort of thing, it's gathering together. And so as a teacher, that has made a lot of sense to me. So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I love that.
So those are very useful. Now I have to share this story of a friend of mine. Also, this goes back quite a ways. When she did this, her destiny came up as, I forget the number, but it's called marrying maiden. And the role of the marrying maiden, when you get that, is kind of like it describes the concubine who's kind of powerless in a situation.
Mm.
And she called me up and she's like, what? This is my destiny. Interestingly, I had done past life readings for her previously, and one of them, she had been a concubine, a secondary wife. So here it was almost this karmic type thing.
Interesting.
And so she's like, I don't want this to be my destiny. And I'm like, yeah, I'm with you on that. So I said, ask the I Ching how you can change that. And the reading that she got said repair. And basically, the message was somehow you've participated in creating this, therefore, you are the perfect one to repair it.
Mhm.
And indeed, she shifted her attitude. She worked on that within a couple years, kind of met her soulmate partner, and it went forward from there. So,
Oh, I love that.
and
And again, yeah.
keeping in mind that the I Ching is the book of changes, that it's never going to give you an answer that's absolute and solid.
Mhm.
It things change and move. Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. Oh, I just love it. I can't wait to do more with this. So with each of those big questions that you mentioned, you would throw the coins out 6 times for
Yes.
each question, and then you would come up with
An
what I'm
answer.
wondering is, I think I've asked you before if you're an astrology person. So in human design, I believe it's 64 gates, and I'm thinking that it's these 64
That would make
different.
sense.
I
Yes.
think that's what it is. And so, like in an astrology chart, these gates are, you have sort of like an energetic signature, and you have gates that are defined that are going to be strong themes throughout your life.
Yeah.
And I do find it to be like shockingly accurate with people.
Ah,
And there's a subconscious part of this and a more conscious part. And specifically with the subconscious part, I find it to be really, really useful for people to look at, like, what do I have going on deeper that I haven't quite uncovered? And I think this is how they baked in the I Ching. So I'm gonna have to do more looking into that to
oh
be sure.
yeah.
So nobody like take notes on that. That's just me kind of thinking this through and trying to put together how it is actually baked in. I think there's also something with the profiles that goes together with the I Ching, but that's something for me to look at
Oh
later.
yeah, that all sounds absolutely fascinating. Now, I'd be remiss, especially if people who are listening are familiar with the I Ching, if I didn't say this. On those big questions, I was told just read the text of the one of 64 readings that you get. But with those various lines, each throw of the coins gives you a yin or yang line. Sometimes those are called changing lines. If the coins are all heads or all tails, it's indicative that there's a change that is potentially going to unfold from the situation. So to make the I Ching a little bit more complex and in-depth and nuanced, you read whichever lines come up, and then that will lead you to a second reading. And that's the kind of future probability that comes out of that. Now, with those big questions, I was told you don't look at any of that. You just take the answer, don't look for their lines or the unfolding of that. But I just want to make sure that people understand, yeah, there's elements to the I Ching that are more complex.
There's a lot of complexity and depth to this, it sounds like. How hard is it for somebody, if they're listening, they're like, I want to learn this system. How hard is it to get going with it?
It in a way, it's really not that hard. I feel like the best book for instruction in it is the I Ching workbook by R.L. Wing, W-I-N-G. There are others I use, but when I'm teaching a class, I'm teaching somebody how to use it. That has the clearest illustration of when you throw the coins, draw this kind of a line and build it like this. And if they change, do this. It's got a little of the history and the background and philosophy. There are other books that have far more in-depth philosophical components to it that goes deep into Chinese philosophy and some things that people might find in acupuncture and that sort of thing. But most books will, of course, have a pretty basic explanation of how to use it, but it can get confusing for people. They have to remember to draw the lines from the bottom up because you're building a hexagram. So when you throw the coins, the first line is the base of it, and then you draw the other lines on top. Sometimes people get confused about that. Yeah, but it's in there.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I find that can be confusing for people, for myself, in the past, is that when somebody starts using a divination system and they don't necessarily have that trust for it yet,
Yeah.
I do think it can create a level of confusion because it's almost like there's a part of us that wants to believe and we're still sort of fighting against it. And our ego is like, that's not real, doubting, questioning, all that. And it can create a lot of confusion. So, do you have any advice for people if they wanted to use a divination system, whether it's this one or something else, to lean into that trust or sort of let go of that doubt? Do you have any recommendations for that?
There's value in the doubt if it can be used properly, right? And for one thing, different people are drawn to different divination tools, right? Some to the tarot, some to angel cards, rune stones. So I think somebody maybe needs to explore them to see what speaks to them. And the other thing is that, as you know, there are various decks of tarot, various kind of
Yes.
interpretations there. Um, Ideally, one might just be able to, read the images and get the message, but we need those translations sometimes. And that's why I like having several translations of the I Ching. And I'll say to say to students like, yeah, sometimes if I don't like the answer, I'll go to a different translation, right? And
Yeah.
then I might be able to hear it. It's like another friend says it in a different way. So there's that component too. But you're also right there. There is value to that willingness to kind of say, well, my ego doesn't have all the answers.
Mhm.
And often the ego just wants what it wants. It doesn't want to be told, no, this is not the time. No, you need to wait. No, don't speak out to that person at this time. Um, and so that willingness is important. But the I Ching is beautiful in its education of the ego.
Mm.
Another translation by Carol Anthony, she does a beautiful job of talking about the ego like a young child. And to me, it's much less judgmental than a lot of ways I hear people talk about the ego and how it gets in the way and that sort of thing. She's like, well, it's that child part that gets scared, that tries to manipulate to get what it wants because it doesn't understand anything else. It tries to protect itself and, does things to do that. And the I Ching can give an education on the ego itself, the clamoring of that voice and how to quiet that down. Yeah.
For me, I think it just took like solid repetition
Mhm.
and seeing how every morning that card would show up during the day. And sometimes it was just like, it just for me, it just felt like it took a long time again, the patience
That's a
of
good
like
point.
trusting and more and more and more. So I just didn't know if you had any tips or tricks for that.
I think that's great advice is just give it time, test it over and over again. Because you're also kind of learning the language that it speaks.
Mm. Mhm.
And like any different therapist or wise teacher, the angle or perspective, the voice that it has is going to be a little bit different. Yeah, all trying to get to the truth. Go ahead.
Yes, and I love that you said to try different systems because that is a huge piece of it that I think some people, for example, my neighbor got a set of just the regular tarot cards, like the the old school Raider Waite, and I've never connected to those. I just don't like energetically, I don't feel drawn to them. I don't feel like I understand them. But I have several decks and I just love that you said that because different decks feel differently and it's easier to connect for me with angel cards. That feels very resonant. And anything that is ancient Chinese feels like it's in me somehow. Like there's a remembering, I've always joked that I was like a 99-year-old little Chinese man doing acupuncture and I feel like that's in me somewhere. There's got to be a past life because it just feels so familiar. And so when I learned about the I Ching, I was like, oh, how has this not come across my path? It just kind of lit something up. And then kind of in that same vein, I was just playing with the idea the other day, I'm 50% Irish, like straight down the middle. I've got a lot of strong Irish in my genes. And I thought, I wonder if I really need to lean in, experiment with more of the Celtic traditions, and even like herbalism and things like that from that lens, because it's like in my DNA. I just wonder if I would resonate with it. And so I've just been curious about that. I don't know if you've kind of played with that at all for yourself.
Well, I definitely think there's something to the notion that we may be drawn to different systems because of our past lives. And I think that that kind of broad-mindedness is very nice, to imagine it's like the I Ching is not only for people specifically of Chinese descent or Celtic or Native American or whatever. It's like, no, all of these things may be a part of our past history. And
Mhm.
therefore, yes, a particular approach, philosophy, may be what's speaking to some part of our soul that may have studied these same tools centuries ago. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
There just might be an ease to stepping into one of these systems
Yeah.
that just isn't there for a different one because it just hasn't been in your past.
Exactly.
In the same way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, in these systems that are kind of like a language, it's also not unlike dreams, where dreams kind of have a language of their own. And yet we have subjective symbols, in terms of, if a dog means loyalty, or if we get bit by a dog, as a kid, it might mean something else. So the language in these systems is something that we need to familiarize ourselves with and listen to that resonance. Yeah.
Is it the kind of thing where, I mean, is there an older system that you're aware of? I'm just wondering how many systems were actually knowingly or unknowingly built on this consciousness.
Well, there are said to be divination systems found throughout the world, some places, including prior to this system of the I Ching, tortoise shells. They would take a tortoise shell, throw it into the fire, and then interpret the way it crackled. Other
Hmm.
systems would use bones that would be maybe thrown into the fire or something like that. And then you also have the classic tea leaves type of thing. So it really speaks to the fact that people have been searching for higher guidance for a long time, feeling baffled, feeling puzzled, feeling stuck, or simply just wanting to make sure they're functioning from the highest place of integrity and compassion and generosity, those kinds of virtues. I have one other story I think might be useful to illustrate, because it kind of addresses the usefulness in our human connection and the way the ego can kind of get in there and want to control things. Um, More recently, I was taking a trip again to the West Coast, another niece experiencing a real serious illness. And I got out there, met with her sister. We were staying at an Airbnb and then preparing to visit her sister, who had, to our surprise, been released from the hospital. And we were anxious to visit because it was just a 4-day visit. And I got in there Friday. I was going to leave Tuesday. So we were anxious to see her, of course, on Saturday. And she just put the brakes on. She was not ready to see us. She just got very quiet when her sister was talking to her on the phone about when we might come, and kind of just refused to answer her. And we're like, what? And I've come all this way. I'd gotten up at 2:30 in the morning to catch an early flight and long layover. And so I was exhausted, mind you, by the time Friday evening rolls around. We're having this conversation, and I'm like on the verge of tears going, what? And her sister is saying, maybe we should just show up. We want to see her. Our intentions, we thought, were pretty good. We wanted to help. And so I thought, oh, I need to settle down here. And I brought the third translation I like, which is more portable. It's the Brian Brown Walker translation of the I Ching. And thankful that I took it with me. And the reading I got was conflict. And basically it said, in conflict, the best thing to do is withdraw. I'm like, okay. I sat with that for a minute. I was like, of course this is right. And by the next morning, or it might have been the next morning when I did that reading, and I took a nice long walk along the beach, and I'm like, I know what we need to do, because we were just outside Sacramento. And so the niece that I was staying with, her 16-year-old daughter was also there. So the three of us were having a nice time. Said, you know what? We need to pull back. This is not the time to go visit. Let's go into Old Sacramento and make a day of it. And so we had this leisurely vacation-like day, lovely weather. There was some kind of parade, a Mardi Gras parade going on. And then The next day we went to visit. The next 2 days we went to visit. So that was so important because we were kind of like guns blazing type thing.
Mhm.
And I knew when I read it, of course, that's the right action. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes we just can't get there because we're like all in our fight or flight and
Yes.
like, what do I do? What do I do? And we've been triggered and,
Yeah.
we thought we envisioned something going one way.
Yes.
It doesn't go that way. Our mind is still like, but this was the way it was going to go. And so it's hard to extract
Exactly.
ourselves and get into that higher self. And what a beautiful way to do that. So do you have special coins? Are there special coins that go with this, or do you just use
I do
anything?
not. I let go of doing that. I have a little collection of pennies. Um, but if I'm traveling or something like that, I just hold them in my hand and say a little prayer, kind of to prepare myself. Some people like using the Chinese coins. They vary a lot depending on where you get them. Some are like almost too big and clunky. I've had people say, yeah, it's just too heavy for me. Um, but theoretically, you could use any coin, any three
Anything at
coins,
all?
but they should be the same three coins, 3 dimes, 3 nickels, 3 pennies. Yeah.
Are there any questions that you steer people away from asking?
Mm,
Like,
that,
for example,
yeah,
just the one that just popped in my head, like say somebody really wants to get pregnant and
yes.
they're struggling. Like, is there anything, can it go the wrong way?
Yes. You could ask, I would ask something like, I'm having difficulty getting pregnant. What advice can be given? Or you might ask, what's the best timing? You don't want a yes or no question. You want to find a
Yeah.
way to ask in terms of timing. And sometimes I'll say to people, you can frame it in the time frame of in the next 3 to 6 months, would this be good? And it's important again because timing does change. And that's why people need to be willing to um, see where it goes, but then ask later. Um,
Mm.
Sometimes reformulating the question is better than perpetuating because sometimes people will say, well, what if I ask the same question 3 times? Will it give me the same answer? And there is actually an I Ching reading that says, um, do not pester the sage, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend that is a tarot reader, and we always joke about how, like, if you keep asking the same question, our guides are like, I'm done with you. Like,
Exactly.
I already gave you the answer.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, when I first moved to St. Louis years ago, I wasn't sure what my next step was going to be. I was in some kind of transition work-wise or just having moved here. And so I I asked the I Ching, what next? And I got the answer stagnation. And I just had to laugh because I'm like, well, Rhonda, you can't even ask a better question than that. Of course, just sit there. So
That
there,
was that was what I was getting ready to say, was that it's like, or getting ready to ask, do these messages come through kind of in that way where you're like, well, I know, like, I'm stagnant right now. That's why I'm asking.
yeah, that too.
It's like
Right.
never fails. I'll be like, I'm really struggling with this decision. I'm going to pull a card. What is the best, course of action, or, whatever my question is. And I'll pull
Yes.
the card and it will say, you are getting ready to make a big decision and you need to sit with it. And I'm like, well, no shit.
Yes.
I know. I'm trying to go beyond that,
That
but
is so
it's so
true. That is so
literal.
true.
It's so
Yeah.
exact.
And again, the I Ching will kind of like delve deeper into like what to do with that stagnation and
Mhm.
trusting, of course, this sense of um, the higher level of the universe, right? We're not at the linear cause and effect level, that things are moving and shaping in the cosmos, in the unfolding that we have difficulty seeing because we're so used to causation, that notion of
Mhm.
acausal or synchronistic kind of happening is more difficult. But if the I Ching or any system can just remind us, as like there's a reason. It's like
Yeah.
getting stuck in traffic and then finding out down the road there'd been an accident that you might have been in if you didn't go. Those types of things sometimes remind us. It's like okay, maybe there's a reason here.
Mhm.
Yeah. One of the wildest questions a woman asked in class was somebody had been calling her on the phone and hanging up.
Mm.
And she wanted to ask, and I always go around their first time and say, "What's your question? What's your question?" And she read the question. I'm like, "Well, I don't really think it, it's not going to say Joe Blow is calling you. I said, "But go for it." She did the reading. I don't know what the answer was, except that she got an answer. She goes, "I know who it is. It's this
No way.
boyfriend." And for some reason, she hadn't arrived at that conclusion until she got that I Ching reading. So who knows? You know?
Yes. I think that's part of the magic. As you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense because it's like she got the message that she needed to tap into whatever stream of consciousness to figure that to solve that problem and get the answer. And so
Yes.
it's interesting how, again, going back to the cards, because that's the system that I use, it's like there will be like maybe three or four sometimes descriptions that go with that card.
Mm.
But it's like if you just sit with like what resonates, it's
Hmm.
like, oh, that's what this card is for. And it's for this person. It's for this
Yes.
specific situation.
Situation.
Whereas maybe the other things don't totally resonate, but it's like, oh, yep, I know what that's for. Or maybe there's a little part of the picture that stands out that doesn't normally catch your eye. And it's like, oh, my eye is focused
Yes.
on that butterfly. I've never even noticed a butterfly on this card. Well, there's a reason why.
Yeah.
It's like the card is just helping you tap into that field and that information.
Yeah. Excellent point. And it again has that feeling of synchronistically what we're going to resonate with. And sometimes going through the I Ching, there will be a line that I might have read, or in one of the readings, a sentence or two that didn't stand out before. And
Yes.
sometimes that's all you need, also.
Hmm.
Kind of like with a dream, sometimes you don't have to analyze the whole thing. You've got one image that speaks very clearly, speaks volumes. So sometimes it's sufficient to say, oh, I know what it's trying
That's
to tell
it.
me.
That's it.
Yeah,
It's a feeling, it's a knowing, like that's the message that I was supposed to get.
right. And that's how it also educates us on our own intuition. You know,
Hmm.
theoretically, yes, we should be able to just tune in and maybe not need these tools. But I think it
Hmm.
educates us as to, oh, that's what that feeling is like when that's the answer or
Gosh,
that's the
so
clarity.
true.
Yeah.
So true. Helping us come home to that and
Hmm.
just helping us validate ourselves a lot of times and be like, yeah, I knew that. I
Yeah.
knew that. I felt that. And there that is. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for somebody who I know you've already mentioned several books, would you recommend that workbook? Like if somebody right now is like, I want to order a book, I want to get started with this, what would be your first go-to
Yes, the I Ching workbook
resource?
by R.L. Wing. There's another newer publication called the I Ching workbook, which is new one to me. I'm still exploring and getting familiar with it. But R.L. Wing has good instructions. And then Carol Anthony's book is A Guide to the I Ching. I, I want to say she might have an update, a newer translation or essays on that. Um, and then Brian Brown with an E, Walker, which is the I Ching or Book of Changes. Um, there is another translation which is the most in depth. Um, it is the Book of Changes and the Unchanging Truth by I'm going to Master Ni Ni.
Okay. A
And
lot of good
for
stuff.
somebody who really wants to explore the notion of the philosophy behind it and the complexities of it, I would say his book is a good one in that regard. And um, I took a class with an American who was helping him, Master Nee, write that translation. And he said the student who was assisting him had observed that even Master Nee didn't always follow the advice of the I Ching. And he was kind of teaching his students look, you don't have to follow that advice. But also sometimes what happens is you don't follow the advice and you wish you had. So
Mm.
we have the free will to make that
Yeah.
choice. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to share a story really quickly too. I have limited experience with this system, but a few years ago, I want to say it was in 2020, I was really in kind of a dark night of the soul space in, I mean, in kind of a lot of ways, like outside of the pandemic stuff, there was a lot of like relationship stuff that happened just kind of coincidentally or
Mm.
synchronistically, with it. And then, in as far as my business went, I really felt like this was the time that I needed to like step up and make things happen and go, go, go. But at the same time, I was just dealing with all kinds of inner stress and turmoil and just dealing with a lot. So I had stumbled across, I don't even remember how I went down a rabbit hole, and I did find one of those online I Ching readers where you just like click a button and it does it for you and shows you. And the messages were all, I would say, I'm going to say negative, but I don't mean that in like a bad sense,
Oh,
but they were
that's a good point.
realistically,
Yeah.
yeah, they were very realistically like, this is what's going on. This is
Yeah.
how you need to shift your mindset. You know, it just, and it described dynamics in relationships, and just, it was like very shockingly accurate. And I would say, for the most part, I mean, I keep my vibration high, and when I pull cards, of course I pull cards that are lower vibration showing me what's going on, but I was in a space where that was very accurate. Like that's exactly what should have been showing up, because that's the mindset shift that I needed. That was the vibration that I was in.
Yeah. And
So
that's an excellent point. It is a mirror in that regard. But also, I caution people sometimes because there are titles like shocking is one of the titles, and
mhm.
danger, subtitled the abysmal. Um, so
The
some that don't,
abysmal.
the abysmal, yeah, the subtitle,
Yeah.
youthful folly, um, uh, temptation, different things like that. Sometimes people will initially kind of like react to it like that's
Yeah.
negative, and then they go into it, and it's like,
Mm.
oh, difficulty at the beginning, or shocking can be a good shock, like winning the lottery. But
Mhm.
it can also wake us up to things that we need to be looking at. So again, you get one of those kinds of messages or titles, but as you read into it, it's kind of like, oh yeah,
Oh
right.
yeah, it was very, very accurate. And as somebody who I feel like I do a good job most of the time with my mindset, well, it's easy when things are going well to have a
Yeah.
positive mindset. It's when the shit hits the fan
Yeah.
that it gets harder. And you have all these nervous system reactions going on also that are driving the negative thoughts. And so I felt like it was that friend that could sort of step in and be like, hey, sister, like this is what you can't control what's going on around you.
Yeah.
This is what you can do right now to shift the situation. So I just wanted to say
Wonderful.
that because I
Yeah.
felt like, and for whatever reason, I don't know if it was like shocking enough that I just needed to step away from it. I didn't feel this need like I normally do to just like go deeper and learn everything I could. It was like it felt like I got what I needed in that moment,
Hmm.
and now probably is the time for me to come back to it and learn more and start playing with it. But very, very accurate. And sometimes the messages can be maybe feel a little bit harsh, but if you can sort of surrender to like maybe that is what I need to hear right
Hmm.
now, you know.
And again, a
Um,
different translation may give that message a different perspective,
and it
or yeah.
might be a little more gentle. Might be a little more
Maybe.
gentle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. So good.
Uh-huh.
Seems like there was one more thing I wanted to ask
I
you,
know.
but
I thought so too. There
um,
was something rolling around for me. Maybe you've got it there.
let's see. My notes are all over the place, but oh, there was another story too. And again, this isn't with the I Ching, but with my tarot cards, but kind of around that same time. Actually, it was that same time. In my mind, I had been really successful in business. I had launched my first online group program. It had, was going really well. It felt like it was this huge pivotal like shift in my business where it felt like I was getting ready to just like launch into a different stratosphere, kind of. This is the way I can say it. because there was a lot of momentum and it just felt like, okay, I'm going to do this and now I'm going to do this. And I had sort of started that ball rolling. Well, my next plan was to launch another online program. And as I do, I started pulling cards on it and they were very clear, like, nope, this is not the time. Stress cards, um, tower card, like it was just a lot of turmoil. And I was kind of like, but it's the right time. My ego was like, it's the right time. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And I decided not to, thank God, because there was, like 3 weeks later, there was a series of events kind of unrelated, but all very, very stressful. And that would have been it would have been impossible probably for me to navigate holding space for people in a group coaching program when I was dealing with that kind of stress. And so I'm such an advocate for business owners, really anyone utilizing a divination system for this reason alone, just to kind of like feel into, like you said, the timing. Like, is the timing right? It wasn't that program wasn't right ever. It was just in that specific time when my ego thought like, this is what I'm going to do. And when I actually let myself feel into the energy of it, it was like, no, this is not for your highest and best good right now. So I was very grateful.
And again, sometimes you won't know until things unfold. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that sometimes months will go by. I don't use the I Ching. I mean, obviously I've used it over a long period of time. Sometimes at first people want to do a lot of readings and they get to know it. But there's an organic kind of process too. It's like, oh, I need to check in here.
Do you feel like people can overuse it or get kind of obsessed with it?
Yes. And usually I think that works its way out though. Do you know what I mean? Either the answers stop making sense or they get overwhelmed and confused. It's kind of like eating a big meal where it's like, then you just got to take time to digest it.
Yeah.
So organically, it kind of works itself out, I think. Or the I Ching itself may say, you're pestering me,
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think I can relate to feeling that, like wanting too many answers, getting too much information, and then not being able to kind of put it together in a useful way, and getting to that point where you're finally like, okay, I need to step away and just let things unfold for a little while, and then I'll check in when my intuition taps me on the shoulder and it's like, hey, it's time to look.
Yeah.
Ebbs and flows.
And also the I Ching, we talked about sometimes getting those messages of shocking and difficulty and that sort of thing. But it's also reminding us at times when things are at their peak, when it's time to act, messages of prospering. And one I was reminded of the other day is called Great Power. And the older translation that I have, the first line says, great power when it befalls a man is a true test of character. And I love that because we kind of have that assumption. It's like, ooh, it's powerful. Things are good. I can make things happen. And it's like, but now your character is going to be tested.
That's right.
Yeah. There's wisdom throughout. Yeah.
Most definitely. Most definitely. This has been so enlightening, and I'm just so excited to learn more. And again, like I said, go back and kind of go to a deeper level of how this fits into human design. I feel like you would probably really like human design.
I'm going to explore that for sure.
Yeah, and I'm almost positive that the 64 messages are the 64 gates. And so even like you're saying the shocking one, a lot of people have come along and done their own translations in the same way of each of these gates and softened the message a lot of times. But if you go back and look at the original human design, it's a lot of it can be kind of like, okay, but sometimes we need to shock ourselves.
That's
sometimes
true.
we need that to snap out of it and make a shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not always fun, but sometimes we need
it's
it.
not always fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Rhonda, thank you so much. This is so good. So beautiful. You're just such a wise woman, and I love talking to you, and it's a delight to be in your energy and your space.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Kelly. Thanks so much for inviting me.